All right. We're live. Okay. So so tomorrow we'll complete the last of our look at these European monarchies. And the next thing we do, okay, yeah, we got France and what we call the German states. I'll explain that in just a second. They're not states like New Jersey and Pennsylvania. They're states as in like nation states, okay? Don't worry. In a way, there's some relation there. Where are your notes?
Can they hear me on that mic?
They can now.
Shout them out.
Yeah, where are your notes? All right, get them.
Your notes.
Get them. So yeah, this is two parts. We kind of discussed these together because these two countries sort of interact a little bit and kind of become rivals. And that's when we talk about World War II. One, there's a lot of that leading into this. Let's see if we can get this going today. Woo! That's fun. What's up? We'll see. Do it this way. So, okay. So, whereas when we talked about England, England was what we call a limited monarchy. In France, it's going to be pretty much an absolute monarchy, meaning that the king, we'll talk mostly about Louis XIV, is going to have absolute power. Exactly. And, well, not the 14th. He makes it out okay. It's the 16th that ends up paying for his mistakes, really. But in France, when we think of like a king that has basically total power, that's what we've got in going on in France and in some of the German states. Okay, so let's talk about France first. Yeah. Okay. All right, some vocab. You can come back to this later. Okay, first let's talk Henry IV. So before Henry IV in France, you got to realize, like, you know, there's like a big religious war going on in France, kind of set off by that whole Martin Luther Protestant Reformation thing. And Henry sort of brings peace to that. But you had Protestants and Catholics basically, you know, deciding, is France going to be a Protestant or Catholic country? And both sides were afraid to lose because they were afraid, hey, listen, if we lose, we could be persecuted and driven out or killed. So the country has to figure out, because you've got it's predominantly Catholic, but there are lots of Protestants in there too. When Henry IV takes power, he basically decides that he's going to allow people to worship as they please, as long as they are politically loyal to him. So he does lots of things for France that help it rebuild itself, because there were these were called the Wars of Religion in France. And there was really a lot of rebuilding to do because people had been killing each other in pretty large numbers. So when a lot of these countries that we talk about today, like France, you know, they have a time where they weren't like really a country, way back in the past somewhere. Okay, after Henry IV, you get Louis XIII. It was Henry's son. That's not him on the left. Problem is he takes the throne at the age of 9. And his mother basically sort of controlled the government for the next 7 years until he was able to rule. Once he did become king, he basically handed over most of his government power to this guy over here, Cardinal Richelieu. And Richelieu strengthened the power of the monarchy. He took away power from the nobles. So whereas in England, the nobles, who are below the king, sort of, have a lot of power and force the king to make agreements to limit his power, in France, it works the other way. The king kept doing things to take away the power of the nobles and put the power in the king's hand. And Richelieu did that as well. One of the things he starts, which is, you know, not as important. Well, maybe it is important if you would think about it. Like, you might think of it as important. But they begin to realize that they need to standardize the French language. incredibly exciting, isn't that? Let's talk more about standardizing a language. No, let's just talk about why it was important. One of the things that people, when they're in groups or when they identify with a country or a society, Rick, open up your notes and take some. One of the things that happens is that people, one of the ways people bond together is if they have a common language. And whether we agree with it or not, this is one of the things you'll hear people say when people come into another country is learn the language we speak here. So that's important to people, and it's important. Now, in France at that time, you have to understand, not everybody speaks French, and not everybody speaks the same French. And you have lots of regions that speak dialects that are similar, but not quite French. And so what the government does is it starts to standardize it, meaning they start to basically write dictionaries and books that explain what is considered to be standard French. And this kind of knits the country together a little bit tighter and helps them have more power, basically. All right, then you get Louis XIV. He takes power at the age of 23. He reigns for 72 years. He's the longest of any European king ever, or queen. His people called him the Sun King, or Le Roi Soleil, and because he was said to have brought light to his people, and figurative, way. He didn't, right? Yeah, well, yeah. So he believed that, and lots of kings believed that. Okay, so in American government system, representative democracy, people believe that ultimately the people we elect should be responsible to us. Meaning the people have the power. They give it to a government. They give it to a government in order for the government to serve the people. But it works the other way in terms of these kings, because the kings are going to say they are the source of political power. Especially if you're Louis, you're saying God backs me. God is behind me. God supports my kingship, and that's the way it is. So all power comes from the king. Chris. So glad you asked. One of the things he's going to do is he's going to strengthen the power of the French monarchy, the French king. One of the most famous landmarks that you have in France, and then everybody pays a visit to it, was the Palace at Versailles. I'll skip back to the other two slides in a second. So what did Louis do? Okay, so in order to have the power and make a lot of the reforms in the country that he wanted to have, like building a stronger navy, reforming taxation. He didn't really get around to that. But strengthening the power of France was that he needed the power to do that, because if the nobles are saying, oh, we don't really want to do that, it's hard to move everybody in that direction. So he added on, well, this was a hunting. Versailles was like a hunting lodge to start off with. It was a place where kings went for like a little vacation. They could go out and hunt a little bit, and then they would go to Versailles. But he decided he was going to expand this thing hugely, and he did. And so spent lavishly on this thing. Huge palace. Why does he do that? Okay, most of all, I'm the king. I want to show off my wealth and power. That's part of it. That feeds into that Sun King thing going on there. Also, you want to bring all the nobles, and what you're going to do is you're going to put them in the Palace of Versailles. And so the nobles aren't out in their little countryside places, maybe plotting to overthrow the king or plotting to, do something, whatever. You put them in Versailles, and you make them just sort of do things for you all day. Not even like things like, they're not even like jobs. They're just like the most ridiculous thing. Like, okay, king gets up in the morning. There's a whole big ordeal. He brings in, there's people that come in, and there's like a guy to take off his left sock, and a guy to take off his right sock, and a guy to put on his left hose, and a guy to put on the right hosiery, the little longer socks. And then there's a guy to put on the shoes, and a guy to put on his pants, and a guy to put, and I'm not kidding you. And so what you do is you tie up these nobles with these rituals they have to do over the course of the day as the king, and that keeps them busy so they can't go out and plot against you. So Versailles, hugely extravagant, puts the country in a lot of debt, famous landmark. My wife and I tried to go to it this summer on our honeymoon. It was like 95 degrees out and about a 3-hour line wait to get in. So we kind of just ate our lunch outside, walked around the gardens a little bit. That was kind of nice. Anyway, so he was an absolute monarch. He thought that what happened is if you allowed people to sort of, kind of make their own decisions, it would result in chaos. You needed a king to unify everybody and move them in a similar direction. And there's people backing him up. That should say Jacques without the T. Bossuet. He was a church official, and he basically found ways to back up what Louis was saying, the divine right thing, that God was behind the king. Now, he did think that the king should act with humility and restraint because he said, listen, the king, if the king is a bad king, God will judge him even more harshly. God will treat him treat him as a king. He should be doing good for his people. If he doesn't, God's going to punish him. Nobody ever knew what God did to the kings that did poorly, but, that is where it is, basically. Okay, so you got Versailles. All right, what about his policies? He strengthens the power of the monarchy, like we said. Economically, he doesn't do anything to fix the tax system. This is going to be a problem in a couple chapters. The French have a tax system at that time that places most of the taxation on what's called the third estate, which is basically everybody except members of the church and the nobles. So in many cases, the nobles and clergy, people in the church, don't pay any taxes. And everybody else pays all the taxes pretty much. So that tax system, a lot of people are starting to question it and say, hey, wait a minute. The poorest people and the most, by the way, educated people also are bearing the tax burden, and people like nobles who don't really, produce anything for society, kind of, they don't have to pay taxes. So what's up with that? All right, now the religious thing, his grandfather, I think it was, if I have the timing right, said, listen, everyone will be able to worship now, not as they please. Okay, you had to be Christian. You didn't get to be a Wiccan or anything like that. But Louis XIV takes that back. He decides that everybody has to be Catholic. He gives people a chance to leave. It's basically, if you don't worship the way I want to worship, you better get out now, because if you don't like it, tough. So that's kind of what he does with that. Some people liked it, some people didn't. He expands the power of France. Parts of what are today Belgium will become part of France this time. He builds alliances. He, at one point, tries to take over Spain, kind of, through this little succession thing we won't get into. Didn't happen. But anyway, this is considered one of the high points of French culture. And, when it comes to the things that he did in terms of building Versailles, that alone is a big draw of getting people to come to Paris and see it and stand in line in the heat for 3 hours, which, as fabulous as it was, I wasn't going to do that. It was on my birthday. I didn't want to sweat. Anyway, Louis also fights lots of wars. Wars are expensive. As much as people would like to think that when you win a war, you could profit very handsomely from it, make a lot of money, it's really usually the opposite. In very rare cases, do nations that win wars actually make a profit off of it. Most of the time, it costs much, much more. And both sides are spending fabulous amounts of money to do that. Anyway, so he goes into debt to finance Versailles. And Versailles, it's not just about building the thing, it's about staffing it. Because they have like servants for everything, and people to mow the lawn, and I don't even know, they didn't even have like John Deere then. They had, they probably had to use like actual shears to trim the lawn, and people to cook stuff, and just crazy. So people to shovel or the horse poop and stuff like that. So that's going to be bad. He's going to go fabulously into debt, and 2 Louis later, that's going to be a really big problem because that Louis is going to be left holding the bag, so to speak. All right, so fashion in Louis' time is all about displaying your wealth. Even today, fashion is often about showing who I am, showing my wealth. One of the trends that emerged kind of at my teenage years, maybe my early 20s, was the beginning of the flat brim, uncreased baseball cap with the sticker left on. And what is that? That's a display of wealth. I have so many hats. I left, this one, I just bought it. I don't even have time to take the sticker off. Look how many hats I can buy. I know nobody thinks that way, but that's kind of what it is. So, so Louis, famous, showing off his wealth. All right, here's a little divine right picture. Hey, what's coming down from heaven to let everybody know who's king? An angel. There we go. He's got a little helmet. All right, what else is Henry? Henry never really fought in any wars. He never went out, but part of being a king is demonstrating that you could be a warrior, that you were, you could lead your troops in battle. As far as we know, he never really did that, but he still wears some armor to kind of show that he comes from that tradition. All right, bright colors are another way to show your wealth, because bright colors have to come from dyes. Dyes at that time are pretty expensive, and even cloth itself in that time is really expensive. Yes. Mm-hmm.
This is something that you would suggest people would write down. So if you have your head down and you're not writing, why are colors important? Because you have to buy dye.
Exactly.
So that would be
And so as you go, you really need to be making sure that you jot stuff down. It's really not optional. If I have to take more measures to increase that, I will. Okay, so yeah, so dyes or something and cloth itself, the fact that he's got lots of cloth displays his wealth. Here's a little bit more bright colors, lots of frilly things. All right, you're showing off your cloth. He's getting older in these, you know. He's got the little elbow thing going that everybody does in the pictures to make their arm not look fat. You know, the thing where you go like, you don't want to go like this, you would go like that. And your arm looks skinny. Sporting a little mustache there. Anyway, more frills, more color, more armor. Beautiful. Okay, cool. All right, so let's shift to someone we call the German states. Let me help you wrap your head around these. So France is building up. There's no such thing as Germany then. Keep that in mind. No Germany. No Germany till 1870. Germany, pretty relatively young country. But there are German-speaking people. There are many little small states. And these are usually ruled by princes, but they're little kingdoms. They're not big ones. It's like Prussia and Saxony and Chris. Yeah. So, yeah. What's that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the German people, what you have is people that speak German that begin to. Yes. And there's also something called nationalism, which we'll talk about later. And so what happens is German-speaking people begin to sort of see connections between themselves and other German speakers, saying, you know, we have a common history, common culture. They're also the German nation unifies partly out of like military alliances too. Like 1815, later we'll talk about Napoleon. Napoleon from France goes rampaging through Europe, and this convinces a lot of the German countries to start batting around the idea of maybe we could form alliances to stop that sort of thing in the future. So they were sort of countries, but you've got Prussia, Bavaria, Saxony, you know, Prussia, all sorts of places. Okay. Austria's out there. Austria never becomes part of Germany, but they're German speaking. They got their own little empire thing going on out there. They had Maria Theresa. She was a capable ruler. That's Austria. Okay. Then you got a place called Prussia. Now, when you talk about Prussia, Prussia becomes the leading nation later in forming Germany. They're the ones that sort of, when we talk about German culture, a lot of it has its origins in Prussia. So you had Frederick William, and then Frederick William I. They had kind of a weird naming thing going on there. But they did lots of things to make the Prussian country more powerful. They were famous for having a very small but very well-trained standing army. And whenever you wanted a really good, army, you got the Prussians. So this works into the French balance of power. Later, when Napoleon starts rampaging through Europe, the British get the Prussians, and they get the Russians, and they get the Austrians to help them defeat France. And, various alliances happen there. What else is going on? Then you had Frederick II. He's called Frederick the Great. He wants to expand Prussian territory. He's able to take some from Austria. And people start to notice Prussia kind of running around, kind of doing some stuff, making a name for themselves. Cool. All right. How many questions on the SMART assessment?